Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Osman Khan. I work for ITS Squared. I'm the VP for Cybersecurity Services and Business Development. So I'd like to introduce our colleagues here, the panelists, for this Leveraging Threat and Vulnerability Intelligence panel discussion. So first we've got Moritz Lucas, who's, if you take a wave, take a bow. He's the Director of Intelligence Solutions at Intel 471. We have Andrew, Senior Solutions Consultant from Anomaly.
Thank you.
And we have Nasser Sadiq, who's the Regional Manager for Middle East and Africa at Rapid7.
Assalamu alaikum.
Basically, in terms of the session, the flow of the session is I'm going to briefly give you definitions of cyber threat intelligence from a Gartner and a SANS perspective. Thank you very much. We've done the intros for the guys, so that's great. Now, you never go amiss by quoting Gartner, right? Gartner definitions are brilliant, right? But they're very comprehensive and difficult to digest from my perspective. So anyway, this is Gartner's definition for threat intelligence. Like I said, it's a bit of a mouthful. So they say it's evidence-based knowledge, including context, mechanisms, indicators, implications, and actionable advice about an existing or emerging threat. Now, I much prefer the SANS definition. It's far more concise and, I would say, understandable and something you can relate to. So what SANS define it as is threat intelligence is about analyzing information about the intent, capabilities, and opportunities of adversaries in cyberspace. Now, the key aspect of these threats, as a previous speaker explained, is that it's not just about, you need to have the intent, capabilities, and opportunities. So the adversary, the enemy, the threat actor, needs to have all three aspects, right? From an intent, capabilities, and opportunities perspective. So what does that mean? So if you take the UK government as an example, they may have the capabilities and opportunities to attack the US, but they would never do that. They have no intent. So therefore, it's not a valid threat. So you need all three aspects of that. The other key aspect of this definition is analysis. Now, analysis, because, people, when they talk about threat intelligence, it obviously means people have their own definitions and views of what threat intelligence is. Now, threat feeds, or what they call threat intel feeds, in reality is not threat intelligence. And the reason for that is to do intelligence. Intelligence is about taking information, collecting it, processing it, analyzing it, and then disseminating it, right? So the collection and processing aspects of threat intelligence is something that machine learning you can use and leverage. Although if you look at the SANS survey, which we'll come on to, the capabilities around that aren't very strong. But the analysis aspect of it is basically the human element. You need human analysts, today at least, at a minimum, to conduct that analysis. So it's about, intelligence is about taking information, collecting it, processing it, and that's where, like I said, machine learning can play a part. Then it's about analyzing it, which is where you need human analysts, okay? And then it's about disseminating it, okay? So, and then it's about answering a specific question. So threat intelligence, you should start off with the requirements whereby which you define the hypothesis or the question that you're looking to answer. And this is where intelligence comes to play. So IOCs traditionally, as some of the speakers will explain to you, has been synonymous with threat intelligence. IOCs in reality aren't threat intelligence, right? So you can say threat data feeds or threat feeds that enrich potentially your SIM, but that's not what intelligence is. For intelligence, you need analysts, and that's where CTO analysts come in. So hopefully that's clear. So this guy's obviously, he was a military strategist, Sun Tzu. He was a general and a legend, and he wrote a fantastic work on the art of war about 500 BC, about 2,500 years ago. And even to this day, this work is studied by across the globe. So the military intelligences of the world, they all study him from a cyber warfare perspective. Now, from this definition, what I like about this maxim is that he explains that if you know your enemy and you know yourself, then basically you're golden, right? When you go into battle, and obviously we're talking about cyber warfare here, you're positioning yourself in the best position, right? If you know your enemy and you know yourself. What do we mean by knowing your enemy? This is where threat intelligence comes in, right? Who the threat actors are, what are their behaviors? How do they go about trying to breach you? How are they going about trying to attack you? What are their goals? What are their aims, right? And this is where TTPs come into play, right? Tactics, techniques, and procedures. Understanding what they are is key. So know the enemy, know what they're going after. This doesn't mean knowing, obviously, all the threat actors that are out there. It's not possible. But what you're interested in is the threat actors that are looking to target you and the industry that you sit within specifically. Over and above that, know yourself. So it's no good just about knowing your enemy without knowing yourself. Knowing yourself is about knowing your digital footprint. What assets that you have that are exposed to potential threat actors that are interested in compromising those assets. So know yourself is also very key. Having both of those aspects, and then like I said, then you're golden. Now, if you know yourself, he says, but not the enemy, then for every victory gained, you will also suffer defeat. So it's good that you know your enemy, but if you don't know, for yourself, sometimes you'll be compromised, and others you may get away with it. And then finally, he says, if you neither know your enemy or know yourself, then you're in a losing battle, right? You're hosed, as they say. So a survey was released by SANS recently, August 2019. So I encourage everyone who's in cyber threat intelligence to read this and digest this report. I'll speak about some of the key findings. This is about so basically they questioned about 585 odd folks across SOC analysts, incident response, and the CISOs and the like. And these are some of the findings that we found. So the efficacy of cyber threat intelligence, 80%. So how effective is cyber threat intelligence in helping you become more secure, being able to detect and respond to attacks? Over 80% have basically stated that it's key to doing that, and they've demonstrated that. So the value of cyber threat intelligence is proven from that perspective. 17% say basically, it's unknown, they're not sure. Now, what SANS recommends from their perspective is that to try and address that 17% is make sure that you capture requirements from these folks. One of the key aspects of a successful cyber threat intelligence program is making sure you capture the requirements from the key stakeholders, right? That includes the SOC analyst, the vulnerability analyst, your incident response team, but also your senior stakeholders, the CISO and the CIO and the C-suite. They are key to that, and even the CFO, like I said, including the C-suite. So capturing the requirements from the key stakeholders from a strategic and from an operational and tactical perspective is crucial for that. Now, I'm not going to go through all these slides because we need to get into the panel discussion, but there's a few other slides that I'll just quickly go over. One is how is data, CTI data being used across the organization? Now, like I said, most organizations, what they do is they typically they take their IOCs, what they call threat intel feeds. Again, it's not threat intel because it's not analysts. There's not human analysis that's there to go and try and answer given questions. So what you will find here, as an example here, is these are all the facets or aspects within an organization that should look to leverage threat intelligence, right? So you're looking at risk management, you're looking at user education, information security awareness. How much of us are actually taking in threat intelligence that's used to answer specific questions? For example, what are the threats to my given business units? What are the threat actors that are trying to target our assets? Those kind of questions should be fed into these various aspects of your organization, vulnerability management, so on and so forth. So you can see there's about 18 plus different facets of your organization whereby which you should be looking to leverage threat intelligence. But in most organizations today, for the most part, from my experience, they just focus on the IOCs they receive. The usefulness of CTI. So for anyone who suspects that it's just a waste of money or it's not adding value to the organization, like I said, the first slide showed over 80% determined that it is of value. And in terms of the value that it brings to bear, you can see there are a number of areas here, including detecting unknown threats, but preventing breaches. You can see there over 69% overall of the 585 folks surveyed has confirmed that preventing breaches is one of the key aspects of cyber threat intelligence. That's enabled them to do that. Over and above that, preventing business outage, which is typically linked to breaches as well. And finally, reducing exposure of sensitive data. So here's a slide that basically talks about how threat intelligence is used in various organizations. And you can see IOCs for the most part, 40% say they're using IOCs and that's been key for them. But over and above that, you can see 27% say that threat behaviors and tactics and procedures of various threat actors, that information is useful to then prepare your defenses specifically for those threat actors. And then you can see the third one, 18% digital footprint. Understanding your digital footprint and what is potentially exposed to potential threat actors is key. This is about knowing yourself. I think this is the final slide on CTI server, then we go to the questions with the panelists. So what's crucial here is of the folks that were surveyed, 37% basically said that their requirements for cyber threat intelligence have not been documented, right? And that obviously is criminal, I would say, right? So if you're doing that, then that's a problem. So you should basically speak to your various stakeholders, understand what the threats that they're interested in, whereby which they're expecting cyber intelligence, threat intelligence, to answer questions related to their potential threats, right? So it could be from a C-suite perspective, which business units specifically are a potential target for a given threat actor, right? So the best way to position it is to frame it as a question and then have the threat analyst collect, process, analyze, and then disseminate that threat intelligence data, threat intelligence reports that basically answers those given questions. So frame your requirements as questions, but speak to the various stakeholders in your organization. And then this is basically a slide that talks about the different feeds. Now, what you'll see, or threat intelligence sources, not just feeds. And you can see there's a mixture of external threat intelligence, also internal. So don't forget your internal threat intelligence as well. So there's threat intelligence services, organizations like Intel 471, for example, that provide targeted threat intelligence service information. But over and above that, you have your information from your SIM platform. You have correlation data there across your estate. You also have information from your incident response and live forensics information that you're working on. And don't forget, it's at the bottom, it's 53% regard network traffic analysis as something that contributes to CTI. But actually, it's a very valuable tool, especially when you're talking about incident response, to study the net flows, with the Cisco's equivalent for this, looking at the metadata associated with the traffic flow that's going across the estate is very valuable and I would say is an invaluable source of threat intelligence information. Anyway, with that was supposed to be a quick introduction. We're going to go into the questions and answers. So I'll take a seat whilst I do that. So first question for Moritz. Improve intelligence maturity, right? So lots of organizations say, right, today we only digest IOCs. And we're now explaining to the audience that's probably at the rung zero. How do you go about improving your maturity level to get to a point where you feel that you're mature? And are there any kind of threat models, maturity models that people should try and assess themselves against? So far, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Osman. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. While answering the questions, I shall stand up, primarily for this part of the audience, because otherwise you just get to look at the back of my head. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm very proud of the back of my head, and some people say it's his best part. But to look at it for more than half an hour is maybe a bit too much. I'll just stand around, probably strike terror into the hearts of the AV people who are trying to prevent feedback. I think that's a very good question. And to answer it, as you can see, these questions are entirely unscripted. No preparation was done whatsoever, but I did bring along a slide. I've put it up. To answer that, I want to quote not Sun Tzu, because you've already done that, as any good cybercrime presentation must include Sun Tzu. I'll include Lewis Carroll, Alice in Wonderland, where she meets the Cheshire Cat for the first time, and where she comes to the fork in the road and asks the cat, which road should I take? And the cat says, well, where do you want to go? And Alice said, I don't know. And then the cat says, it doesn't matter which road you take. When it comes to cyber and threat intelligence maturity models, it's basically the same thing. They are a map. There's a number of them. ENISA has done one, which is very nice. But the key thing about them is they will tell you how to get to somewhere. But the first question to ask is, where do I actually want to go? And I think I want to echo what you said earlier, what came out in the SONS Institute survey, is that very often when we talk to people and you ask them, what is cyber threat intelligence? They say, oh, it's a feed that goes into the SOC. And as a company that focuses on adversary intelligence and thinking about what adversaries are doing and what they're planning, that makes us very, very sad. Because cyber threat intelligence is much more than that. And there are many more things that you can use it for But you need to get away from that. It's just the feed that goes into the SOC and it makes the firewall do wonderful things. It's much more. And once you understand kind of what the art of the possible is in regards to cyber threat intelligence, you can then start planning of, well, which bits of this do I want to implement in my organization? At its very core, really what intelligence is about business, is about supporting decisions. Intelligence in and of itself doesn't stop a single thing, unfortunately, but it helps you make better informed decisions because you're better aware of what's going on and what's at stake. And that is the key. What kind of decisions would you like to support? What do you need to support them with? That kind of feeds into your intelligence requirements. And once you've kind of established that, then you can start thinking with maturity models, okay, so how do I get to the position where I'm able to support those decisions? So maturity models are very good and have a really good role to play, but being kind of on this, first figure out where you want to go, and then use the model and one that fits what you are trying to do. If the map is a bit difficult for you to follow, there are other maturity models that may fit closer. So actually which one to choose is kind of is a fit on what your particular organization and your particular situation. And I'm very glad that at least we have the choice and there is more than one to choose from.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Shukran. So, question for you, Andrew. Building a successful CTI program. So what are the key elements of that? I know you've got lots of experience around developing that for your clients. So,
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I also stand, but for a different reason. I'm just very aware of my bald spot, so I don't want the people in the back to see my bald spot. So before I joined Anomaly, I was a customer for Anomaly. So I was mostly like everyone around the room, sitting trying to figure out how to build a threat intelligence program. And I'm very proud to say that I've worked with Moritz for a very long time as a customer and now both as a vendor as well. Is where do you start with a threat intelligence program? And there is an absolute maturity model that you have to look at. So how do you make it successful? It's as much as investing in the data and the technology as it is in the people. And one of the things that we definitely see a lot of is that there is a big hole to fill in terms of people that can sit and analyze information and take decisions upon the information itself. So I will say that, with all the information that's out there, sometimes, I have to speak from a technology perspective, is that the technology is there to help and enable the human analyst to make better decisions. And, we hear the words like machine learning and AI being thrown around, threat intelligence, all these, words being to sell product. But at the end of the day, it's the intelligence that you get from your community that is probably the most valuable thing to you. So, we call these ISACs and things like that. But to be successful is to know not yourself, not your adversary, but also your neighbor next to you.
Okay, thank you. Question for you, Nasser. So, vulnerability management, obviously well-known discipline, and obviously it's not just about vulnerability scanning, it's about doing the remediation, all that good stuff. But how do you address the zero-day attacks, right? So this is where there's not a known patch, for example, the vendor's busy working on it. How do you go about addressing that?
Hi, everyone.
Is the mic on? Maybe take
Hello?
it. Yep.
Okay, yeah. Really good question. I mean, when you look at zero-day attacks and a vulnerability, a zero-day attack would essentially be an unknown vulnerability which can be exploited. And there's many ways you can look at it. I think what's important when you're handling something like this is to ensure that the monitoring and visibility is there. So you have adequate capability to look at, abnormal behavior. I think that's really, really important on that side of things. Also, you mentioned vulnerability management. I think it's important to ensure, the standard hygiene, the patching of vulnerabilities, the systems are updated. That's really, really important. And I also think it's, if you look at what vendors are doing in the market, we are paying researchers to kind of go out there as bug bounty hunters and kind of see, to stop the threats and look at what zero days are possibly out there before they kind of get in the wrong hands. So that's what I would advise.
Thanks very much.
If I can just add on to that. So in terms of threat intelligence and zero days, one thing that I've experienced myself in a breach scenario is that even though it's a 0-day to the public, a very known vulnerability is a 0-day to you, because you are obviously running blind to it. And we've had this situation where there was a piece of malware which was commodity and key logging, and it wasn't basically exploiting any 0-day vulnerabilities. We just didn't patch our systems, and that's your 0-day. If you're not patching, you are open to a 0-day which is maybe 5-7 years old. So at the end of the day, it comes back to the hygiene that you mentioned. It is absolutely one of those things that you need to get hold of your assets within your organization to learn the intelligence of yourself. And it just, it's a big loop that keeps repeating itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So interesting point. I mean, I guess just to add to that, I think things like making sure your systems are hardened as well, so you're not exposed to any potential threats, enable things like DEP, DEP, and secure hardened standards, configuration reviews obviously are key as well. But like you said, in many cases, they don't have to exploit the 0-day attacks because we're not doing a good enough job in patching our systems, right? Okay, thank you, Nasser and Andrew.
If I can just, sorry, I'll just
Sure.
really quickly add to that.
Yeah.
One is there's a need an enormous focus on the 0-day, because we all imagine we get hit by the 0-day. The unfortunate truth, ladies and gentlemen, is that 90% of the breaches and attacks happen with known vulnerabilities. It's not a 0-day. And that goes into how the patch management is very important. Another recent development is that there are so many new vulnerabilities being discovered that actually we talk about organizations that are really, really focused on trying to patch everything, are saying it's basically growing, it's going above our heads, as in we can't patch everything anymore. There's not enough hours in the day to do it. So actually now we're talking about patch prioritization, where they're actually saying we know we can't patch everything. We want to patch those things that we believe that are the most important, either because the vendor says this is a critical patch, either because the system in question plays a critical role in our business process, or, and this is where cyber threat intelligence comes in, because we believe this is a vulnerability that actual attackers are likely to abuse. And that aspect, that final piece of the puzzle in patch prioritization, is one thing where cyber threat intelligence can really help make a difference.
Very good, thank you. So another question for you, Moritz. How do you effectively leverage CTI at all levels, right? So from a strategic, tactical, and operational perspective. And I'll throw up this slide.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, continuing the tradition of the entirely unscripted question, I've brought along another slide. And basically, the first challenge is that to realize, and it plays back into what is cyber threat intelligence, there are 3 layers to it. The strategic, the operational, and the tactical. And by the way, if you have a risk background, you might know it as strategic, tactical, operational, but that is a discussion we can have at great length offline. But these 3 layers, and at all 3 layers, you can apply the results of cyber threat intelligence throughout your organization. The challenge, the really big challenge that a lot of people are finding, is that when we get to the tactical level, that's actually where the IOCs live. And that's where lots of structured technical data lives, lots of structured technical information. And we love that because we work in IT and we like structured information because our computers like structured information. So we can feed those ISEs into the SOC. It goes to all the wonderful products that we have, and suddenly we're protected. We can measure them. We can talk about how many IPs we've pushed in. We can actually start measuring how many things we've blocked based on that. And then we discover that it's shockingly little because that depends on the quality of your feeds. But actually, the operational and the strategic level, the information becomes more diffuse. Now we're talking about actor intentions. We're trying to track them. What verticals are they tracking? What are they trying to achieve? And the further up that chain you get, the longer the timelines get extended. But this is where some of the real value lies. Again, if you're applying it throughout the organization, a lot of the focus is on, we're trying to mitigate, we're trying to help prevent the attack, we're trying to stop it in its tracks. But actually, you can do quite a lot about the attack happening in the first place. So I'll give you an example, spending time with companies who have online websites that still just use usernames and passwords. And when they're designing them and they're working, they think this is fine. And then when you have cyber threat intelligence, you understand that there's an amazing ecosystem in the criminal underground focused on account takeovers. There's lovely tooling and stuff available. It's really, when you're into that kind of thing, it's great to track. But it means that these kinds of decisions on how to build secure systems, the basic what's acceptable changes over time, and really internet-facing systems with usernames and passwords nowadays, you really need to think twice. And that's at that strategic layer when you're designing and building systems, when you're creating your minimum and base standards, we're trying to prevent incidents from happening in the first place, where that kind of knowledge can really feed in. So basically, to summarize, there's the 3 layers, and using it at the higher layers takes a lot of effort, but there's an enormous amount of value to be gained there. But it's moving away from the SOC and actually thinking about, in the very design and conception of systems, you can help. Again, it's about supporting decisions. You can help support people to make better decisions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. So, Andrew, one of the things I read or came across was in the Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report. It was a couple of years ago, I believe, whereby which they stated that when they studied the data feeds, the threat feeds for both commercial and open source feeds, the overlap across them was around between 3 and 5%. So that makes one wonder, which feed should one subscribe to? How do you determine that?
So that's a bit of a loaded answer, because at the end of the day, when we look at threat feeds, that's a lot of information. And when there's that small level of overlap, it has to be applicable to the vertical that you find yourself in. And the use of threat intelligence platforms gives you the ability to not just open up a fire hose of threat feeds into your SOC environment or your SIM environment and saying to your analysts, go forth and find bad things. What's going to happen is you have to put this into a platform somewhere which will be able to tell you that this feed that you've spent a lot of money on is actually very valuable to you, because it is very applicable to what you are detecting within your own intelligence in your internal network. Then you can do, obviously, an audit against these feeds to find out exactly, well, if I have 30 days trial access, for example, to a specific feed, I can audit it for 30 days and see what was the output from that feed. Now, everyone around the room looks at things from an investment perspective. And of course, you don't want to invest money in the incorrect feeds or the incorrect information. So you need to have some form of way to grade these things. And this is unfortunately where technology can help, because if you're looking at a million events or event IOCs coming in, there's no human analyst that's going to be able to give you the quality that you need. So you need the AIs and the MLs of the world to help you out with that type of audits of your feeds.
And just a quick follow-up question.
Sure.
Unscripted. So commercial versus open source.
So open source feeds we see are generally quite dirty. And if I call them dirty, I mean that they contain a lot of stuff which is false positive. So a platform like the Anomaly Threat Stream platform is there to help pull in the data and look at certain aspects of this information and tell you, look, we're not even going to push this down into your stack because this is a false positive, and we can, consequently say that. So when you say, open source or premium, I will say that the premium feeds like the Intel 471s of the world, which have got human analytics behind it and really good human analytics behind it, those are the things that you really should pay special attention to. And then I would also say that from my point of view, I have to say that the most important threat feed that you have is your community. They are essentially just a threat feed. If they are seeing something on their network and they are in oil and gas, and you are in oil and gas, and there's no other feeds in the world that's seeing the thing that's happening on their network, and if they pass that on to you and you're seeing the same thing, chances are that there is a lot more value in that collaboration model than open source or any premium feed out there.
Very good. Thank you, Andrew. CTI team resourcing. It's a question for you, Maurice, as well. Come back to you, Nasser, in a second. Do you need dedicated threat intelligence analysts? Should you be looking to, providers like yourselves to see, or should you look at hybrid model? What's the best approach for establishing a cyber threat intelligence team, and what does that look like?
So that's a really interesting question. I think the best approach is a mix. I think, and funnily enough, for us that keep saying stay away from the feed into the SOC, we do seem to wander back to it all the time. But I think a SOC, so the ideal CTI team, I think, first off, the ideal CTI team is bigger than just one person. Organizations where you have one person doing CTI basically classify that you're on the starting scope. You ideally need more than one person doing it. You need these people to be connected to other parts of the organization. The idea about intelligence is that you need to spread it throughout the organization to help make decisions. So it's good to have people who kind of come from other teams and are part of the CTI team, because that they can help bridge that gap and make sure that the information and the intelligence gets applied. So with that, I would say possibly a SOC analyst in your CTI team would be a good idea, because a lot of the information initially, certainly at that tactical level, will go into the SOC. A link or a response to kind of a linked incident response is another good one. We see a lot of this information, unfortunately, stables, doors, bolts, and all that stuff. A lot of this information gets applied after the incident happens, and there is a role to play for cyber threat intelligence in incident response. And then I would say it would also be ideal to have a dedicated cyber threat intelligence analyst, and that would be someone with that kind of background. And what I mean by that is a good intelligence analyst. People who come from information security aren't necessarily the best intelligence analysts. It is an entirely different discipline. It is a discipline of kind of taking in lots of different sources of information, judging the reliability, figuring out and using that to piece together a puzzle of what is actually going on, and then accurately communicating that to someone. Someone who's come from an IT security background doesn't necessarily have the skill set for that. So a dedicated Intel analyst with that kind of background would be my next addition to the team. And then just basically more people. And finally, I would be remiss to say some of this stuff you need to outsource to others. If you're thinking about tracking everything that is out there as an organization, that takes an enormous amount of resources, and actually it doesn't make sense to do that all by yourself while the guy next to you is doing the same. So you can use vendors that take that kind of burden off of you and do that on your behalf, and then profit from their hard work as it is by taking that intelligence and feeding it into you. So why have your own analyst? Well, to manage those sources, but also to make sure that intelligence, when it comes in, is tailored to what you as an organization want to achieve, because everybody is different. So you have different intelligence requirements and different decisions that you want to support. So you may want to tweak or present the intelligence in a certain way to make that easier. And for outside vendors, it's very difficult for them to know what's going on inside your head, although we do try, by the way. But I think that would be the key ideal CTI team makeup.
Very good, thanks. So basically a hybrid virtual model, right?
I just want to add something onto that, and Moritz is dead spot on, is investing in people. And obviously being in the region for some time now and having, spread ourselves across a whole bunch of our customers, I will say that in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, there is a big uptick in the growth of people in these types of roles. It's a very specialized role. I've got 17 plus years in cybersecurity, but 5 of those years I had to spend learning to be an analyst, thinking outside of the box, creating certain hypotheses and things like that. And it keeps on from what I see from our customers in the kingdom. Big things are coming, and there are really, really good structures in place, and inshallah this will continue.
Inshallah.
Go ahead. Because this was actually the entirely unscripted question, I have an addendum to my own answer. Call it the afterburner, if you may. I think for the CTI team, there's another key aspect I think that's really important, that at least I want to emphasize, and that's collaboration. I think from your CTI team, besides collaborating with the vendors, the open source fees, etc., your community of likewise organizations. Many of your peers and the ISACs, like the FS ISACs have been mentioned, are a critical are a critical element. Lots of people want to share and collaborate, and that actually includes on how they're applying and using cyber threat intelligence. There's loads of organizations that have gone down this road and that are more than happy to share their experience of how this, what worked for them, what were approaches, what were obstacles they saw, and how they overcame them. And I think finally, and then I will sit back down again, but I also think tooling for that cyber threat intelligence team is also important. I think when you're taking in a multitude of feeds and sources, and in the end comparing it with your own data, your own telemetry that comes off of your own infrastructure, if you're just going to have the CTI analysts go and compare and do that thing, they are quite likely to drown in data very quickly. So I think that's certainly a role where having a tip come in and take some of that heavy lifting off of you to basically do all that comparison and actually see which sources are credible and what matches up with what you're seeing internally is another key aspect. So some tooling for a CTI team also wouldn't be a bad idea, I would imagine.
Well, it's funny you say that, Russ, because that's a question for NASA, right? So technologies-wise, last question of the session, what technologies are out there that you should look to leverage in order to improve your program with CTI?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think there's a lot of technologies out there. There's a lot of technologies being displayed today that can help us in different domains and different areas of cybersecurity. I think what's important is if you look at the main attack vectors, the first one is web and email. That's where the main vectors of attacks happen through. So it's important to ensure that there's web isolation technologies, there's secure browsing technologies, and there's a few nice ones out there at this moment in time that can help organizations. I think the second thing is the other main attack vector is endpoint, and there's many technologies in the endpoint field. It's sometimes hard for a customer to make a distinction, but what I would advise is look at technologies that are kind of being able to do detection without IOCs, so incidents on compromise. I think that's important. Obviously, you can't protect everything 100%, but I think if you're looking at technology, that's where you should be going. I think obviously the third thing, which we've all talked about, is operationally making sure the hygiene is there. You're patching regularly, you're doing scanning, you're doing that constant pen testing. Take control of it internally as well. I think that's very important. And I think the last thing, which we probably haven't mentioned, is cyber ranges. I think the ability to essentially simulate an attack, I think that's very important for security people, and even in the wider IT field, to kind of really get a hold of. It's essentially, you wouldn't fly a plane without being in a plane simulator, right? So I think it's very important to ensure that effectively, before you get your hands dirty with technology and security tools, that you have the right training for it as well.
Thank you very much. And obviously you spoke about tips already. So that's a wrap, unfortunately. I have other questions, but we've run out of time. So obviously for the audience, if you feel free to badger these guys, they're all next door, so as I am. So thank you very much for the panelists and the audience. Thank you.
Thank you. Shukran, everyone.
Shukran.